is a senior editor for Business and Commercial Aviation magazine and a former naval aviator who used to land fighters on aircraft carriers at night. Now he lives in San Diego and he gets the same rush by making VFR approaches to Catalina Island without his glasses. He's known for his encyclopedic knowledge of just about anything that flies that doesn't have a beak and feathers, and he's done pilot reports on most every business airplane built in the past 2 decades. He's applied that same thorough analysis to today's major issues, so he's an exceedingly strong choice to moderate today's discussions of politics, prospects, and pilots. Fred, take it away, and please leave some time at the end for some questions from the audience.
I will. Thanks, Dave. I always wanted to have a bullfrog bass voice like Dr. Franson, and thanks to this head cold, I think I'm almost there. Hey, thanks very much for joining us. I'm sorry this isn't a better time. 2010 for general aviation has been very challenging. Take us back 2-3 years, my gosh, it looked like that every year was just going to get better and better. But now we're facing a number of issues, and Wichita is impacted greatly. When you think about general aviation, it's kind of a food chain, and gosh, so many people who start out in general aviation go on to be military aviators, civil aviators, airline pilots, and so forth. By show of hands, how many of you people got your start in aviation in an airplane that was built in Wichita? A bunch of us, no question about it. And so it's very important that Wichita survives in the future. Yet we've taken a look at a precipitous drop-off in small aircraft deliveries in the last 3 years, 2 years actually. And Andrew Broom and I were talking this morning. He said, gosh, we've got about a 25% fall off in the number of active pilots, going from something like 800,000 to 600,000. And while the top end of the market, Bombardier's top-end aircraft, Gulfstream and Dassault Falcon Jet have recovered, we certainly haven't seen that sort of recovery at the bottom end. At the same time, we're saying, well, geez, if that's the good news, what's the bad news? Well, we're confronting a number of issues, and of course, people are saying, gosh, when's the economy going to turn around? What's going to take to spark confidence in the industry and try to bring us back? Where are we going with things like bonus depreciation? Is that a good idea? What about user fees? How about politics in Washington? I mean, there's just a whole range of issues. I think a good way to start this today is to say, look, we all know it's going to take more pilots. How are the trade organizations going to not only spur pilot start growth, but to completions and keep these people in the industry? Rod, can you help us out first with that?
Well, thank you. I'll do my best. It's a complicated question, actually. There are so many ways to enter aviation. I think some fundamentals to remember. Whatever inspired each of us or each of you in this room is available to inspire others to be involved in aviation and the general populace. And I can say this with a level of credibility. I am the new guy to aviation. The aviation industry speaks to itself a lot. One of the things I think we could all do a better job of is inviting the public in. So that invitation out there in the broad population, I think, needs to be improved. A couple of other things to think about is we'll talk about the Young Eagles program. We've flown 1.6 million young people since 1991 to introduce them to their first flight experience. And here's some things that we've learned through the course of that there's a bit of a model that takes place. We've kind of called this inside the EAA the life of the aviator. And there's 5 distinct phases to the life cycle of the aviator that we've identified. And the hardest part is to transition between those 2 phases, between those 5 phases. The most difficult is between 2 and 3. First one is inspiration. Something inspired you to get involved in flying or aviation. The next step is your first flight experience. The third step is when you choose to enter. This appears to us to be where all the trouble starts. This is where it gets difficult. It gets expensive. The time and money factor comes in. There's a body of work that's out there that's pretty interesting to help people understand how to keep flying and make it through the entry point. But what we've found flying these young people, getting to know the families that are around that young eagle and their friends, their people that influence them. The complexity of that formula, the recipe, is very, very rich, deep, and broad. There's a lot of factors to it. A couple common things to remember. There's got to be a mentor in the life of that child to make it through the process and to get into the process. Without an effective mentorship, they're not going to make it through. We've identified the dropout rate as pretty horrific, and I think Andrew's going to talk about that later. The second thing is you've got to have a mechanism and a pathway for them to follow. Without that pathway, they're going to stall out somewhere in those as they transition to those 5 steps. So we're spending a lot of time understanding. I hate to sound like a science project here, but you know, we have 1.6 useful data points to research, pretty good body of work to draw from. We go back and as we work through this with a kind of a data-driven approach, we've clearly identified certain steps. So to leave you with a thought about what needs to be done, the general populace has to have a strong invitation. You've got to have an opportunity for them to come in and participate, a mentor to take them through the process, and you have to have a pathway to get them to certification. If they don't make it to certification, they're never going to spend money in the field, and they're not going to participate to the degree that we all want aviators to participate in.
One thing that I'm concerned about, Andrew and I were talking about this morning, you know, EAA has done so much to bring young people into the pilot community. What do you think the average age in terms of the demographic, what do you think the average age of new pilots is today, private pilots? Sorry? 42, John. 42. My guess was 45. I guess in our neighborhood, maybe it is 45 or 50. But, you know, across the country, when you take a look at that, Andrew and Rod, how can we help that to bring down that age to get more young people involved in aviation as opposed to people who are never going to make careers of aviation? They're there avocationally as opposed to professionally.
Well, Andrew pointed at me and said, "You take that one, Rod," so I'll take that one. Thanks, Andrew. But Andrew and I actually, and AOP and EA, working very closely together to tackle this. Some people have told me that's a refreshing change, or that's something that we find very useful in the aviation industry. And Andrew and I, and Craig and I, find it not only important, we find it quite a natural process to share what we know and talk about this. Invite the people you know. Most of the Young Eagle rides that I give personally are children of my friends. And then the circle of friends that you have, that each of us as aviators have, and each of us in the aviation world, is a lot broader than we may think. Speak to your school, talk to the circle of friends that you have, and spread the word amongst yourself. I spend a lot of time talking to all types of groups, obviously, but specifically, I find some pretty interesting dynamics when I speak to school-age kids. There's a difference, you know, at the Young Eagles, we have this 8 to 17, that's a Young Eagle definition. There's a different world between 8 to 13, 13 to 17, 17 to graduation from college at 21. Very different things going on in their lives. So the Young Eagle program is about to modify itself. We're about to expand the capability of the Young Eagle program to welcome those to participate around the Young Eagle, and there's going to be a differentiator between those ages. Very different capabilities between a 16-year-old who can go solo and an 8-year-old who might be about to be inspired.